BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, farmers' worries over Bluetongue tests.
There are hundreds of farms that have land on both sides of the border, so it's really problematic and inconvenient for them.
Let's start though with regenerative farming, or regen ag. What's that? Well, that's a question we put to some farmers at a regen event, Carbon Calling.
For me, regen farming is looking really more at the health of the soil and what we're doing with the environment, and then integrating our livestock within that environment.
Regenerative farming puts back and is the opposite of extractive farming, which takes away.
To us, regenerative farming means that we focus on soil health. A healthy soil creates a healthy animal, creates a healthy product, and that creates healthy people.
I think it's just about being a good steward of the land, a good farmer, and a good raiser of livestock.
Well, regen is something we've been talking about on this programme for some years. As you probably gathered from those farmers, it's a way of farming which aims to restore and protect soils. So farming without ploughing, using cover crops so fields are never left bare, growing a range of crops and using animals to fertilise the ground. But there is no one definition, which is a good thing, according to Professor Andy Neal, a soil microbiologist at Rothamsted Research.
I think it's a real strength. It's a collection of different management practices. There's lots of evidence that no one of those will work in isolation, and typically you need a combination. And because we also know that soils behave very, very differently to management, they may not be the same combinations on every farm. Also, we're currently in a period of very changeable weather patterns, and I think that allows a lot of innovation on farm to cope with how our climate is changing at the moment. Not having a strict set of guidelines really encourages farmers to be as innovative as possible.
From a consumer point of view, from a marketing point of view, though, it's handy to know exactly what we're talking about, isn't it?
Well, yes. I mean, that's a different question, really. Certainly, a lot of the regenerative farmers I've learned about, again, innovating and working directly with consumers that want to buy their product. You know, the other reason I think why regenerative farmers are having to do that, if you look at a lot of the commodity markets, they have very strict requirements. I'm thinking particularly of sort of protein content of wheat. Regenerative farming doesn't necessarily achieve, but it doesn't mean that their food is not of high quality. I think consumers know how they want their food produced. They can quite easily find producers that are working in line with their own philosophy.
From a soil point of view, then, what difference does it make if someone starts farming more regeneratively?
A lot of our agricultural soils now we know to be quite severely limited and lacking in organic matter. And organic matter does an awful lot of very good things in soil. It's energy for microbial activity, and it also helps confer a really positive structure so that it lets water in more easily so we don't get flooding. It holds water in greater volumes so that there's some resilience towards drought. And we also know that microbial activity, given a lot of oxygen, which this pore space affords, can be much more beneficial in building biomass and reducing lots of nitrous oxide emissions and other greenhouse emissions.
And there's a trade-off there, isn't there? Because to do all that, a farmer will probably see a drop-off in yield and equally a drop-off in how much they have to spend on the crop.
With min-till or no-till, there's typically a sort of 3 to 5 year slump where yields can really drop quite significantly. But we know that over a longer period of time, soils will start to restructure themselves and things get better. And combine that with the fact that regenerative inputs will typically be reduced, so there's less input costs. Ultimately, it comes out as a reasonable, efficient system to manage and can be very productive financially.
What critics of regenerative agriculture always bring up is the use of glyphosate. Because you can't plough, you have to kill the crop somehow, and people use glyphosate. Is that trade-off worth it?
I think it is worth it when you consider glyphosate within the context of what happens if you don't use it, and particularly ploughing can lose an awful lot of the very beneficial structure. So taken in the round and in the appropriate context, glyphosate has a role. But of course, understanding how we use it as part of a tool within a complex system, and that's what really regenerative agriculture is all about, I think it still has a very important role to play.
Professor Andy Neal, and we will have more on regenerative agriculture all this week. Farmers renting land for mobile phone masts may be about to lose money. The government is considering changing the rules, which would allow companies to rewrite rental agreements and potentially impose rent cuts retrospectively. The guidelines on this are in something called the Product Security and Telecommunications Infrastructure Bill, Part 2. There were changes to the rules in 2017, which critics say caused a lot of problems, and they think the new proposals will make things worse. Joe Evans, Vice President of the Country Land and Business Association.
Well, I'm trying to understand, what they're trying to achieve with these agreements. I mean, from a farmer's perspective, it looks like they are facing into a future of far lower rents without any consultation or choice. I think from the operator's perspective, clearly part of the narrative from the operator must be the interest of faster 5G rollout, but I can't quite see how these proposed changes will achieve a faster rollout, because it seems to me that it's not about enabling new masts, it's about achieving a lower rent on the existing network. And if anything, it will make, prospective new landowners that might be willing to think about offering sites for masts less inclined to do so. So it could have a perverse impact of slowing down rollout.
I suppose the government might argue, look, everybody particularly in rural areas is always saying the phone signal is dreadful. If we're going to improve that, we're going to need more masts, and we need that to be affordable for the people putting them up.
I completely agree. And I don't think you'll find many farmers that are anti the merits of improved infrastructure around the country. And as someone with my CLA role travelling up and down, it's so frustrating how patchy mobile coverage can be. I would just assert that at the moment, the beneficiaries don't seem to be the end consumer nor the farmer in this. That we don't see mobile phone bills going down as part of this move to drive down rents. And I don't recognise that land managers are a blocker in enabling rollout. In the context of the wider cost of delivering mobile phone coverage, paying rent on masts doesn't seem to me like the kind of most fundamental thing that's holding things back.
What would be the impact if this goes through just as is?
Well, I think the impact will be inevitably more risk of litigation and more legal disputes going to tribunal, which will slow things down. Because I think at the moment, the status quo is such that there is a recognised formula that everyone can live with. So I think the implication will be a slowdown. And of course, if it does ultimately get through, it is yet another pressure, which the industry doesn't need at this moment.
Joe Evans from the CLA. A spokesperson for the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology told us our priority is to continue delivering high-quality 5G networks across the UK. We want to ensure the measures to deliver the infrastructure the country needs work for landowners, operators and communities, which is why they are currently subject to a technical consultation, which we invite the public to respond to. Now, from tomorrow, livestock going from England to Wales or Scotland must be tested for Bluetongue, and farmers warn the new system could be catastrophic for their businesses. Bluetongue is a virus spread by biting midges. It doesn't affect humans, but can cause fever and lameness in cattle and sheep. Parts of England which have seen outbreaks have been in restriction zones, but from tomorrow, the whole country becomes a Bluetongue restriction zone. That means that livestock can move freely around England. Well, governments in Cardiff and Edinburgh have decided that animals coming from England must test negative for the virus before they're allowed in. Those tests will cost between £40 and £70 per animal, and there's no government help to pay for that, hence the unhappiness among many farmers. Well, movement of cattle and sheep from England to Northern Ireland remains suspended because of this disease. Speaking on this programme earlier this month, the Welsh Government's Deputy Leader and Minister for Rural Affairs, Hugh Iranca-Davies, told us he was determined to try to keep the disease out of Wales.
Yes, this does have costs. This is not an easy decision. It's not going to be easy for farmers, but it's better than the Minister simply saying, let's invite Bluetongue here into Wales on the 1st of July. However, I am realistic about this as well. We could see incursions into Wales, and we might have to change the approach. The decision we've made does buy us time to actually think through what happens if we have an incursion. How do we then react to that? But we'll do that with the industry as well.
Cattle, sheep and goats will all have to be tested, and as BBC West Midlands Rural Affairs correspondent David Gregory Kumar reports, farmers in border areas like Shropshire and Herefordshire are particularly worried about the impact on their businesses.
Cross-border trade is a massive part of the life of Oswestry Market. Depending on the time of year, 80% of animals sold will cross from England to Wales. But from the first, many animals will need to be tested for Bluetongue.
My name's Helen Roberts. I work for the National Sheep Association. I'm also a cross-border farmer. Although we're just literally in Wales, it will prevent us from coming to sell our stock here today, which is our local auction, about 3 miles away. So it means we're going to have to go further afield to sell our livestock this year. So, yeah, it's just ridiculous.
The auctioneer here at Oswestry Livestock Market says the impact of this decision by the Welsh Government hasn't really started to sink in yet.
My name's John Bevan. I'm an auctioneer at Oswestry Livestock Auctions. Yes, it is going to have a massive impact, especially as we go into the main breeding and store sheep and cattle selling season in the autumn.
A test for Bluetongue can cost up to £70 per animal. It's a huge amount, especially for sheep, which sell for less than cattle. And each test only lasts 7 days before the animals need to be tested again. This all gets pretty complicated pretty quickly. So if you're a Welsh farmer and you bring your animals a few miles here to Oswestry to sell them, you won't need to get a test. But if they don't sell, you'll have to test them before you can take them home again. Helen Morgan is the Lib Dem MP for North Shropshire.
There are hundreds of farms that have land on both sides of the border. So it's really problematic and inconvenient for them. And there's a lack of clarity of guidance over how they should manage that situation at the moment.
The Liberal Democrat MP for North Shropshire, Helen Morgan, ending that report from David Gregory Kumar. But that's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Rebecca Rooney, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.